The cowboy's words hung in the scorching Texas air like gunpowder before a spark. I'd trade 10 herds for one night inside you. Clara Hayes gripped her rifle tighter, her weathered hand steady despite the thundering of her heart. Behind her, 6-year-old Ethan clutched his mother's skirts. Before her stood James Ryland, dusty dangerous, and offering something far more precious than cattle. But first let me tell you how a widow's desperate fight for survival became the greatest love story the frontier ever witnessed. Comment below where you're watching from. Let's see how far this tale travels tonight. The sun bore down on the Hayes Ranch like the devil's own brand, turning the earth to powder and dreams to dust. Clara Hayes stood at the edge of what had once been a thriving creek, now nothing more than a scar of cracked mud snaking through her dying land. The leather of her work gloves had split from the endless labor, much like the hope she'd been clinging to since Thomas died 11 months ago. "Mama, when's it gonna rain?" Ethan's voice carried that particular quality only children possessed, innocent faith that the world would right itself simply because it should. Clara knelt beside her son, brushing a strand of sun-bleached hair from his forehead. At 6 years old, he had his father's stubborn jaw and her green eyes that still held trust, despite watching his mother bury his father in ground too hard for proper digging. "Soon, sweetheart," she lied with practiced ease. "Real soon." But soon was a luxury she couldn't afford. The mortgage payment loomed like a hangman's noose, and Harold Fitzgerald from the First Bank of Amarillo had made his position crystal clear during his last visit. She could still smell his pomade, see the way his fingers had drummed against her kitchen table as he'd laid out her options, or rather her lack of them. "Mrs. Hayes," he'd said, his voice slick as oil, "a woman alone can't possibly manage a spread this size. It's not natural, not proper. Now, Mr. Dalton has made a very generous offer." "Mr. Dalton can take his offer and feed it to his pigs," Clara had replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Fitzgerald's eyes had narrowed, then transforming from false concern to cold calculation. "The bank requires payment in full by September's end. That gives you 6 weeks, Mrs. Hayes. 6 weeks to produce a miracle." Now, 3 weeks later, miracles seemed as scarce as rainfall. Clara watched her remaining cattle huddle in whatever shade they could find. 20 head left from what had once been 70. The rest had either died or been sold for a fraction of their worth to keep food on the table and the bank at bay for just a little longer. Each sale had felt like cutting away pieces of Thomas's dream, pieces of the future he'd promised Ethan. "Clara Hayes." The shout made her spin hand, instinctively reaching for the rifle she kept propped against the fence post. 3 riders approached from the east, dust devils dancing in their wake. She recognized the lead rider immediately. George Dalton, sitting his horse like he already owned everything his eyes surveyed. Dalton was what Thomas used to call a land glutton, never satisfied with his 1,000 acres when someone else had even one. His spread bordered the Hayes Ranch on 2 sides, and he'd been circling like a buzzard since the day they'd lowered Thomas into the ground. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hayes," Dalton said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. His companions, rough men with harder eyes, spread out slightly, a practiced maneuver that made Clara's skin crawl. "State your business and move on, Dalton. You're not welcome here." He smiled, revealing teeth too white for an honest rancher. "Now, is that any way to greet a neighbor? I've come with another offer. A better offer." "My land's not for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price." He leaned forward in his saddle, and Clara caught the scent of whiskey despite the early hour. "I'm prepared to offer you enough to pay off the bank and have plenty left over. You and the boy could start fresh somewhere more suitable. Maybe back east where you came from." "I came from right here, Mr. Dalton. Born in Texas, raised in Texas, and I'll die in Texas on my own land." One of Dalton's men, a scarred brute with dead eyes, spat tobacco juice dangerously close to her boots. "Pride's a luxury you can't afford, woman." Clara's finger found the trigger of her rifle, though she kept it pointed down. "Luxury or not, it's mine to keep. Now get off my property before I forget my manners entirely." Dalton's smile faded. "You've got no water rights without access to Clear Creek, and we both know that creek runs through that disputed strip between our properties. Been disputed since before your husband bought this place. Without my cooperation, your cattle will be dead by August." The court surveyor said, the old markers were unclear, boss, Dalton interrupted. Could go either way, really. Of course, if you were more agreeable, I might be inclined to share water rights regardless of what some judge decides. The implication in his tone made Clara's stomach turn. She raised the rifle, not quite pointing it at him, but making her intent clear. The only thing you'll be sharing is a cell with these thugs if you don't leave. Now. Dalton's face darkened like a thundercloud. You're making a mistake, Mrs. Hayes. A woman alone, a boy without a father's protection, dangerous world out here. Accidents happen, fires start, cattle wander off. Is that a threat? It's an observation. He wheeled his horse around. 6 weeks, Mrs. Hayes. The bank won't wait, and neither will I. They rode off in a cloud of dust and menace, leaving Clara standing there with her rifle and her fear. Ethan emerged from behind the fence where she'd told him to hide whenever strangers came calling. I don't like that man, Mama. Neither do I, baby. Neither do I. That evening, Clara stood in what had been her favorite spot on the ranch, the hill overlooking the southern pasture, where Thomas had proposed to her 7 years ago. The sunset painted the dying grass gold, an illusion of prosperity that would vanish with the light. She'd been 18 when Thomas Hayes had ridden into her father's ranch looking for work. He'd been 23, full of dreams bigger than Texas itself. Her father had warned her about marrying a dreamer, but she'd been too in love to listen. Now she wondered if love was just another luxury she couldn't afford. The next morning brought no relief from the heat, but it did bring visitors. Mary Patterson's wagon kicked up dust as it approached, and Clara felt a mixture of gratitude and shame. Mary was one of the few women in town who still acknowledged her existence. Most of the others had decided that a widow who refused to remarry or sell out was either prideful or improper, possibly both. Mary climbed down from her wagon with surprising agility for a woman of 60. She'd buried 2 husbands and raised 5 children on her own, and her weathered face showed every battle she'd won and lost along the way. Brought you some preserves and cornmeal, Mary said without preamble. Don't you dare refuse it, Clara Hayes. It's not charity, it's neighbors being neighbors. Clara's throat tightened. Mary, Hush now. I also brought news, and it's not good. Mary's expression grew grim. Harold Fitzgerald's been spreading talk in town. Says you've been entertaining men at night trying to suggest improper things to explain why you won't sell. The accusation hit Clara like a physical blow. That's a lie, I know it's a lie, child, but lies don't need to be true to do damage. There's also talk that Bill Carver's been seen in these parts. Clara's blood ran cold. Bill Carver was what Thomas used to call a licensed killer, an outlaw who somehow always managed to avoid the noose, usually because men like Dalton found him useful. You think Dalton would... I think Dalton would do whatever it takes to get what he wants, Mary said bluntly. You need help, Clara. You can't fight this alone. I don't have a choice. No one's going to stand with me against Dalton. He owns half the town. Mary gripped Clara's shoulders. Thomas wouldn't want you to sacrifice everything out of pride. It's not pride. Clara pulled away, anger flashing through her exhaustion. This land is all Ethan has left of his father. It's his inheritance, his future. If I give up now, what does that teach him? That when things get hard, you just quit, that bullies always win. It teaches him that sometimes survival is more important than principle. No. Clara's voice was quiet but firm. It teaches him that his mother couldn't protect what his father built. I won't do that to him. I won't. Mary sighed, recognizing the steel in Clara's voice. It was the same steel that had helped her survive her own trials. Then at least let me help. I'll send my grandson Samuel over tomorrow. He's good with cattle. I can't pay him. Didn't ask you to. Boy needs to learn ranching, and he won't learn it sitting around my place. After Mary left, Clara walked through her house, seeing it as others might. The windows Thomas had installed specially for her facing east to catch the morning light. The kitchen table he'd built with his own hands where they'd shared 1,000 meals and dreams. The rocking chair where she'd nursed Ethan, where Thomas had read to them both on winter evenings. Every room held memories, but memories wouldn't keep the bank at bay. That night, Clara sat at that same kitchen table, spreading out her accounts by lamplight. The numbers never changed, no matter how many times she added them. She had enough to keep them fed for another month, maybe stretch it to 6 weeks if they ate nothing but cornmeal and whatever jackrabbits she could shoot. But the mortgage payment might as well have been $1,000,000. She could sell the furniture, but it wouldn't bring enough. Her mother's jewelry had been sold months ago. The only thing of value left was the land itself, and that was the one thing she wouldn't sell. A sound outside made her freeze. Not the normal night sounds of coyotes and wind, but something else. Footsteps on the porch, deliberate and heavy. Clara grabbed the rifle, checked that it was loaded, and moved to the window. The moon was new, leaving only starlight to see by, but she could make out a figure near the barn. Then another by the well. Her heart hammered as she realized what was happening. They were going for the cattle. She had two choices: huddle inside and let them take what little she had left, or fight and risk leaving Ethan an orphan. It wasn't really a choice at all. Clara slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows. The rifle was steady in her hands as she circled toward the barn. She could hear them now whispering as they tried to rope her cattle in the dark. "Hurry up," one voice hissed. "She finds out we're here, that woman's crazy enough to start shooting." "Let her," another replied. Dalton said accidents happen. Be a shame if she got shot by cattle thieves. White-hot rage flooded through Clara. She stepped out of the shadows and fired into the air. The crack of the rifle split the night like thunder. "Next one goes through somebody," she shouted. "Get off my land!" The men scattered, cursing. One tried to grab a calf, and Clara put a bullet into the ground at his feet. He yelped and ran, leaving the calf bawling for its mother. She heard horses thundering away and knew they'd be back. This was just the beginning. Clara spent the rest of the night sitting on her porch with the rifle across her lap, watching the darkness and thinking about the kind of world where a widow had to defend her son's inheritance against men who already had more than they needed. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky the color of dried blood. Clara was feeding the chickens when she saw another rider approaching. Her hand went to the rifle, but something about this rider was different. He rode slowly, almost carefully, and as he got closer, she could see why. His horse was limping. The man himself looked like he'd ridden through hell and decided to keep going. Dust covered him so thick she couldn't tell the color of his clothes. His hat was pulled low, but she could see a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. He stopped a respectful distance from the house and raised his hands, showing he was unarmed, or at least not holding a weapon. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice rough as sandpaper. "I'm sorry to trouble you, but my horse threw a shoe about 5 miles back and stepped wrong. I was wondering if I might water him and maybe look at his hoof." Clara studied him, looking for the threat. But there was something in the way he sat his injured horse gentle despite his own obvious exhaustion that made her lower the rifle slightly. "You alone?" "Yes, ma'am." "You running from something?" He seemed to consider the question. "Not running from. Riding to. Looking for work, but that's getting harder to find these days." "You're not from around here?" "No, ma'am. Up from the Brazos River country. Heard there might be work up this way, but—" He shrugged the gesture, saying everything about the drought and dying ranches. Clara knew she should send him on his way. A strange man on the property would only fuel the gossip, but his horse was clearly suffering, and something in her couldn't turn away an injured animal. "You can water your horse," she said finally. "There's tools in the barn if you need to look at his hoof." "I'm obliged, ma'am." He dismounted carefully, and she saw him wince. He was hurt too, though trying to hide it. As he led his horse to the water trough, Ethan appeared at Clara's side. "Who's that mama?" "Just a traveler, baby. His horse is hurt." Ethan studied the stranger with the intense curiosity of a 6-year-old. "He looks tired." "I imagine he is." "Should we give him food?" Clara's instinct was to say no, but Ethan's innocent compassion stirred something in her. What was she teaching him if she turned away someone in need? "You keep your distance," she told Ethan firmly. Then raising her voice, she called out, "Mister, there's biscuits and water if you're hungry. You can eat while you tend your horse." The man turned, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. Weather-beaten, but younger than she'd thought, maybe 30. His eyes were the color of winter sky, tired but alert. "That's kind of you, ma'am. I can work for it. I noticed your fence is down in places. I could mend it." "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for pay. Just returning kindness for kindness." Clara fetched the biscuits and a jar of water, setting them on the porch rail while maintaining her distance. The stranger, she realized she didn't even know his name, ate slowly like a man who'd learned not to take food for granted. "I'm James Ryland," he said between bites. "I should have introduced myself proper. Clara Hayes, this is my son Ethan." James touched the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Hayes." "Young man." He finished eating and immediately went to work on the fence, despite his obvious exhaustion. Clara watched from the porch rifle, still within reach, but no longer pointed in his direction. There was something about the way he worked, steady, methodical, without any flourish or show, that reminded her of Thomas. "Mama, why is he fixing our fence if we're not paying him?" Ethan asked. "Sometimes people do things just because they're right to do," Claire replied, though she wondered herself. In her experience lately, nobody did anything without wanting something in return. The sun climbed higher, brutal in its intensity. James had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms marked by old scars and new bruises. Whatever had brought him here, it hadn't been an easy journey. He'd been working for about 2 hours when the riders appeared again, 3 of them moving fast. Clara recognized them immediately, Dalton's men from the night before. James straightened slowly, hammer still in his hand, watching them approach. "Well, well," the scarred one from yesterday said. "Looks like the widow found herself some help after all." "Just passing through," James said mildly. "That's so. Well, you best pass on through quicker. This ain't a healthy place for strangers." James set down the hammer carefully. "I'll be on my way when my horse is rested." "Your horse looks plenty rested to me." The tension stretched tight as barbed wire. Clara stepped off the porch, rifle in hand. "You men were told to stay off my property." The scarred man grinned. "Just being neighborly, Mrs. Hayes. Wanted to make sure this drifter wasn't causing you any trouble. The only trouble here is you. That's no way to talk to men who are just looking out for a poor widow's welfare." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Of course, maybe you don't need looking after. Maybe you got yourself a new protector." The implication was clear, and Clara felt her face burn with anger and humiliation. But before she could respond, James spoke, his voice still mild but with an edge of steel. "I believe the lady asked you to leave." The scarred man's attention snapped to James. "You believe, do you? And what are you going to do about it, drifter?" James picked up the hammer again, testing its weight. "Fix this fence. Unless you're planning to help, in which case you're welcome to grab a hammer. Otherwise, you're just in the way." It was such an unexpected response that for a moment nobody moved. Then the scarred man laughed, ugly and harsh. "You got some stones, drifter, but stones won't stop a bullet." "Neither will threats," Clara interjected, raising her rifle. "But this might. Now get off my land before I lose what's left of my patience." The 3 men exchanged looks. They were used to intimidating people, but an armed widow and an unknown drifter complicated things. "This ain't over," the scarred man said finally. "Mr. Dalton don't like complications." "Then Mr. Dalton should mind his own business," Clara replied. They rode off, but Clara knew they'd be back. They always came back. James returned to the fence as if nothing had happened, but Clara noticed he kept the hammer close and his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. "You just made yourself an enemy," she said. "Wouldn't be the first time." "Dalton's not just any enemy. He owns half this county." James drove a nail home with precise strikes. Men like that always think they own more than they do. "You don't know what you're getting into." He stopped, then looking at her directly. "Mrs. Hayes, I've got nowhere particular to be, and nothing particular waiting for me. Your fence needs mending, and from what I just saw, you could use an extra pair of eyes around here. I'm not asking for anything except maybe a spot in your barn to sleep and whatever food you can spare. When my horse is healed and your immediate troubles pass, I'll move on." "My troubles aren't going to pass. I owe the bank more than I can pay. Dalton wants my land, and the whole town thinks I'm either too proud or too improper to know what's good for me." "Then I guess I'll be here a while." There was something in the simple way he said it that nearly undid her. No judgment, no conditions, just a statement of fact. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help a stranger?" James was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on the fence. "My mother was a widow. After my father died, men came around thinking they could take what was ours. She fought them every day until her strength gave out. I was too young to help her then. He met Clara's eyes. I'm not too young now. The words hung between them heavy with meaning. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the iron grip she'd kept on her fear. The barn's through there, she said finally. There's fresh hay in the loft. Supper's at sundown. James touched the brim of his hat again. Obliged, Mrs. Hayes. As Clara walked back to the house, Ethan tugged on her skirt. Is he staying, Mama? For a while. Good. I like him. You don't even know him. Ethan considered this with 6-year-old wisdom. He fixed our fence. Bad men don't fix fences. Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought. That evening she found herself cooking a proper meal for the first time in weeks. Nothing fancy, beans and cornbread with the last of the salt pork, but it felt strange to set 3 plates instead of 2. James ate with the same careful deliberation he brought to everything complimenting the food without overdoing it. Ethan peppered him with questions about his horse, about the places he'd been, about everything a curious boy could think of. Have you ever seen an Indian? Ethan asked. A few. Were they scary? No scarier than anyone else. Most folks just want to be left alone to live their lives. Mr. Dalton says Indians are savages. James's expression didn't change, but Clara saw something flicker in his eyes. Mr. Dalton says a lot of things, I imagine. Doesn't make them true. After supper, James insisted on helping with the dishes, which felt so strange and domestic that Clara didn't know how to respond. Thomas had never helped with household chores, considering them women's work. But James moved around the kitchen like it was natural, drying plates and putting them away once she showed him where they went. You've done this before, she observed. Spent a lot of years taking care of myself. A man who can't wash a dish is a man who's going to eat off dirty plates. When the last dish was put away, James headed for the door. Thank you for supper, Mrs. Hayes. I'll check the livestock before I turn in. That's not necessary. It is if we want to keep them from midnight visitors. After he left, Clara tucked Ethan into bed, listening to his prayers, which now included the nice man fixing our fence, along with the usual requests for rain and his Father in heaven. She sat on her own bed afterward, still fully dressed, trying to make sense of the day. This morning she'd been alone, facing impossible odds. Tonight there was a stranger in her barn, someone who'd already stood between her and trouble once. It didn't change the fundamental problem. She still owed the bank money she didn't have. Dalton still wanted her land. The drought still strangled everything it touched. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone. A sound from outside made her go to the window. James was walking the perimeter of the property, checking gates and fences. He moved like someone who'd learned to be careful, to always know where trouble might come from. Who was he really? What had brought him here to her failing ranch at just this moment? Clara didn't believe in Providence anymore. Thomas's death had cured her of that. But she couldn't deny the timing was curious. She was still pondering this when she heard horses approaching fast. Multiple horses. Her rifle was in her hands before conscious thought. She flew down the stairs and out onto the porch to find James already there, standing in the yard facing 5 riders. Not Dalton's men, this time worse. Bill Carver sat his horse like violence incarnate, his reputation preceding him like a dark cloud. The men with him were the kind who'd burn a house with the family still inside and sleep sound after. Evening, Mrs. Hayes, Carver said, his voice smooth as snake oil. Heard you had some trouble with unwelcome visitors. Thought I'd come make sure you were all right. I'm fine, Mr. Carver. You can go. He laughed, the sound raising goosebumps on her arms. Now, that's not very neighborly. Here I am offering my protection, and you treat me like a common criminal. If the shoe fits, James said quietly. Carver's attention snapped to him. I don't believe we've been introduced. No need, you were just leaving. Was I? Carver dismounted, his hand resting on his gun. I don't recall deciding that. The other men dismounted too, spreading out in a practiced formation. Clara's mouth went dry. This was about to go very bad very quickly. What do you want? She asked. Just a conversation, Carver replied. Mr. Dalton is concerned about you, Mrs. Hayes. A woman alone, desperate circumstances. He wants to make sure you understand all your options. I understand them fine. Do you? Because from where I sit, you're about out of options entirely, unless... He smiled, revealing gold teeth. Well, there's always ways for a woman to earn money, especially a pretty widow. The insult was calculated, designed to provoke. Clara felt rage rise in her throat, but before she could respond, James stepped forward. That's enough. Carver's hand moved to his gun. You looking to die tonight, Drifter? Are you? The tension crackled between them. Clara counted heartbeats, waiting for the violence to explode. Then from the doorway, a small voice said, Mama. Ethan stood there in his nightshirt, rubbing sleepy eyes. The moment stretched taut. Even men like Carver had lines they preferred not to cross in front of witnesses, especially children. Back to bed, Ethan, Clara said, her voice admirably steady. But Mama. Now, Ethan. The boy retreated, but Clara knew he was probably watching from the window. Carver remounted his horse. We'll continue this conversation another time, Mrs. Hayes, when you don't have company. They rode off into the darkness, but their threat lingered like smoke. James stood in the yard for a long moment watching the darkness. Then he turned to Clara. Pack what you need. Take the boy and go to town. Stay with someone. This is my home. And they'll burn it down with you inside if it suits them. Then I'll rebuild it. You can't rebuild if you're dead. Clara met his eyes, seeing genuine concern there. If I run now, I'll never stop running. Men like Dalton and Carver count on fear. It's their biggest weapon. Their biggest weapon is violence. No, Clara said quietly. Violence is just a tool. Fear is what gives them power. I won't give them that. I can't. James studied her for a long moment. You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met. Probably both. Something shifted in his expression, a softening that transformed his weathered features. Then I guess I'd better stick around. Wouldn't want to miss seeing which one wins out. You don't owe me anything. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, James agreed, but I'm making it mine. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, the walls she'd built against hope and trust, showing their first fissure. Why? She whispered. James looked out at the dark horizon, then back at her. Because some things are worth fighting for, even if they're not yours, maybe especially then. He headed for the barn, leaving Clara standing on her porch, rifle in hand, and a strange new feeling in her heart. Not quite hope, she couldn't afford that yet, but something close to it. Something that felt like the first drop of rain after a long drought. Inside, she found Ethan at his window, as expected. Is the bad man gone, Mama? Yes, baby. Is Mr. James going to stay for now? Ethan nodded solemnly. Good. I think Daddy would like him. Clara's throat tightened. What makes you say that? Because he's protecting us. That's what daddies do. She tucked him back into bed, kissing his forehead. Sleep now. Everything's going to be all right. It was another lie, but sometimes lies were all that stood between a child and the darkness. Clara returned to her own room but didn't undress. She sat by the window watching the barn where a faint light showed James was still awake, probably keeping watch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The bank's deadline crept closer. Dalton would escalate. Carver would return. The drought would continue its stranglehold on the land. But tonight, for the first time since Thomas died, Clara Hayes didn't face the darkness alone. A stranger had chosen to stand with her for reasons she didn't fully understand but couldn't afford to question. She thought about what James had said about some things being worth fighting for, even if they weren't yours. It was a foreign concept in this harsh land where everyone grabbed what they could and held on tight. Maybe that's what made it precious. The moon rose, casting silver light across the dying land. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and defiant. Clara knew the feeling. She checked her rifle one more time, then settled in for another long night. But this time when she looked out at the darkness, she saw that faint light in the barn and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. She felt less alone. And in a world trying its best to break her, that was no small thing. The morning after Carver's visit dawned hot, and still the kind of stillness that made Clara's skin prickle with unease. She found James already working, replacing broken boards on the barn door, his movements efficient despite what must have been a sleepless night keeping watch. "You should have woken me," she said, offering him a cup of coffee made from their dwindling supply. "No need. I don't sleep much anyway." He accepted the coffee gratefully, and she noticed the way his fingers brushed hers, brief, but somehow significant. "Besides, you've got enough burdens without adding exhaustion to the list." Clara wanted to argue, but the weariness in her bones told her he was right. She'd been running on pure stubbornness for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone else shoulder part of the load. "Mr. James!" Ethan came running from the chicken coop, eggs carefully cradled in his shirt. "Look, 4 eggs today. That's 2 more than yesterday." James smiled, and Clara was struck by how it transformed his face. The hard edges softened, revealing someone who might have been carefree once before life carved its lessons into his features. "That's fine work, young man. Your chickens must trust you." "Mama says animals know good people from bad." Ethan looked up at James with innocent certainty. "They must know you're good, 'cause even our mean old rooster didn't chase you this morning." "Ethan, go wash those eggs," Clara interrupted, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Carefully now." After the boy ran off, James returned to his work, but she caught the ghost of a smile still playing at his lips. "That rooster's chased off grown men," she said, trying to explain away her son's enthusiasm. "Ethan's just impressed. He's a good boy. You've raised him well." "His father deserves most of the credit. Thomas had a way with him, could calm his tantrums with just a look." She paused, surprised at herself for speaking of Thomas so easily to this stranger. "I worry I'm not enough, that a boy needs someone who loves him fierce enough to face down men like Carver," James interrupted quietly. "Everything else is details." Before Clara could respond, dust on the horizon caught their attention. Not riders this time, but a wagon. As it drew closer, she recognized Mary Patterson's sturdy figure at the reins, but she wasn't alone. Henrik Johansson sat beside her, his massive frame making the wagon seat look child-sized, and behind them rode Pastor Williams and, surprisingly, Mary's grandson Samuel. "Now, what's all this?" Clara murmured. Mary pulled the wagon up to the house with her characteristic lack of ceremony. "Clara Hayes, you can put that suspicious look away right now. We're here to help, and you're going to accept it gracefully, or I'll box your ears like you were still in pigtails." Henrik climbed down from the wagon, his Swedish accent thick as ever, despite 20 years in Texas. "The widow Patterson tells me you have fence trouble. I have wire. Good wire. And these hands still remember how to string it." Pastor Williams, a thin man who looked like a stiff wind might blow him over, but had a spine of iron when it mattered, dismounted carefully. "Mrs. Hayes, I've been praying on your situation. The Lord moved me to remind folks that neighbors help neighbors, regardless of what certain parties might prefer." Clara's throat tightened. "I can't pay—" "Nobody asked you to." Mary cut her off. "Samuel here needs to learn proper fence work. Henrik's wire is rusting in his barn, and Pastor Williams needs something to sermon about besides the heat. We're all getting what we need." James stepped forward, and Clara saw the others notice him for the first time. Mary's sharp eyes assessed him with the speed of a woman who'd survived by reading people right. "You'd be the drifter who stood up to Carver's boys," she said. It wasn't a question. "James Ryland, ma'am." "Mary Patterson. This is Henrik Johansson, Pastor Williams, and my grandson Samuel." Henrik extended a massive hand that swallowed James's in its grip. "Any man who stands with Mrs. Hayes against those vultures is good man in my book." Pastor Williams was more reserved, studying James with thoughtful eyes. "Mr. Ryland, I don't recall seeing you in church. Haven't been in these parts long enough to attend pastor." "Well, you're welcome anytime. The Lord's house doesn't turn away honest souls." Samuel, all of 16 and trying to look older, stepped forward eagerly. "Is it true you faced down 5 of Carver's men alone?" "I wasn't alone," James said, glancing at Clara. "Mrs. Hayes had her rifle and the courage to use it." "Still," the boy persisted, "they say Bill Carver's killed 20 men." "They say a lot of things," James replied mildly. "Most of them designed to make folks too scared to stand up for themselves." Mary clapped her hands. Enough chattering. We've got work to do, and sun's not getting any cooler. What followed was something Clara hadn't experienced since Thomas's funeral, the feeling of community closing ranks around one of their own. Henrique and James worked the fence lines with Samuel eagerly helping learning the proper tension for wire and the spacing of posts. Mary commandeered Clara's kitchen, somehow producing enough food for everyone from the meager supplies supplemented by what she'd brought. Pastor Williams mended the chicken coop and told Ethan Bible stories, though Clara noticed he kept his rifle close at hand. It was late afternoon, the work nearly done, when Clara saw James and Henrik talking quietly by the well. The big Swede was gesturing toward the empty creek bed, and James was nodding, his expression thoughtful. "What are you two plotting?" she asked, approaching with water for them. Henrik accepted the ladle gratefully. "This man, he has idea about water. Maybe crazy idea, but maybe not." James wiped sweat from his brow. "That creek bed isn't completely dry. I noticed this morning there's still moisture about 3 feet down. Water's there just running deeper because of the drought. So we dig. Not a well that'd take too long and might come up dry, but we could dig out a section of the creek bed, create a catch basin. It wouldn't be much, but it might be enough to keep your remaining cattle alive." Clara felt a spark of hope quickly tamp down. "That's days of digging in this heat." "I've got days," James said simply. Henrik nodded. "I help. My boy Eric, too. He's strong like ox lazy like one too, but I make him work." "I couldn't ask." "You don't ask. We offer." Henrik's blue eyes were kind but firm. "Your husband, he helped me when my barn burned." Helped rebuild, never asked for anything. Some debts, they don't die with the man. Before Clara could respond, Samuel came running, pointing toward the road. "Riders coming! Lots of them!" Everyone moved quickly. Naturally, the men grabbing tools that could serve as weapons. Mary pushing Ethan inside the house. Clara retrieved her rifle and James appeared at her side, a hammer loose in his hand. But as the riders approached, Clara realized it wasn't Dalton or Carver. It was Sheriff Morrison with 3 deputies, and their faces were grim. Morrison was a complicated man, not wholly owned by Dalton, but careful not to cross him either. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, aware of the armed reception waiting for him. "Mrs. Hayes," he touched his hat. "Folks?" He nodded to the others, his eyes lingering on James. "I don't believe we've met." James Ryland. "Mr. Ryland, you planning on staying in these parts?" "For a while." Morrison absorbed this, then turned back to Clara. "I need to inform you that a formal complaint has been filed regarding water rights on the disputed strip between your property and Mr. Dalton's. There will be a hearing next week to determine proper ownership." Clara's heart sank. That strip's been disputed for 20 years. Why a hearing now? Mr. Dalton's produced some new documentation. Old survey records, he says, proves his claim. Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You'll want to get yourself a lawyer, Mrs. Hayes." "With what money?" Mary demanded. "You know she can't afford a lawyer, and you know Dalton's timing ain't coincidence." Morrison's jaw tightened. "I enforce the law, Mrs. Patterson. I don't make it." He looked at Clara again. "The hearing's Thursday next, 2 o'clock at the courthouse. Don't miss it or you forfeit any claim." As he turned to leave, he paused near James. "Word of advice, stranger. This ain't your fight. Smart man would move on before things get complicated." James met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate the concern, Sheriff, but I reckon I'll make my own decisions about what's smart." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral, maybe literally." After the sheriff left, the group stood in silence, the weight of this new problem settling over them like a shroud. "It's a setup," Pastor Williams said finally. "Dalton knows you can't afford legal representation. And without that water access, your cattle die," Henrik added grimly. Clara felt the walls closing in. Every time she found a handhold, something pulled her back down. Maybe it's time." "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Mary interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare give up now." "I'm not giving up. I'm being practical. If I can't win—" "You haven't lost yet," James said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "These old survey disputes, they usually come down to interpretation of landmarks, right?" trees, rocks, natural features that might have changed or been removed. So, Clara asked, so maybe we need to find some documentation of our own. When did your husband buy this place? 6 years ago, from old man Pritchard's estate. And before Pritchard, Clara thought, the Hendersons, I think. But they've been gone for over a decade. James nodded slowly. County records go back further than that, and sometimes people keep their own records. Letters, diaries, old photographs that might show those landmarks. Pastor Williams straightened. The church has baptismal records going back 30 years, and marriage certificates often included property descriptions for legal purposes. My father knew Pritchard, Henrik added. They played cards every week. He might have mentioned something in his journals. Hope that dangerous emotion Clara had been trying to suppress flickered to life again. You really think we could find something? I think Dalton's not the only one who can play the documentation game, James replied. But we'll need to move fast and carefully. If he gets wind of what we're doing, he won't, Mary said firmly, because we're going to be smart about this. Samuel, you and Pastor Williams check the church records. Henrik, go through your father's things. I'll visit Agnes Henderson's sister over in Carson County. They were close, might have kept letters. What about me? Clara asked. You go through everything of Thomas's, James said. Any papers, receipts, letters, even if they seem unrelated, and I'll ride to the county seat, check the official records. That's a day's ride each way, Clara protested. Then I'd better leave tonight. As the others prepared to leave, making plans to reconvene in 2 days, Clara pulled James aside. Why are you doing this? Really? He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dying light. You ever feel like you've been drifting, Mrs. Hayes? Like you're looking for something but don't know what it is until you find it? Yes, she whispered, thinking of the emptiness that had consumed her since Thomas's death. Well, maybe I found what I was looking for. He met her eyes then, and something passed between them, electric and undeniable. A fight worth having, people worth fighting for. Before she could respond, he was moving away, preparing his horse for the journey. Clara stood there, heart racing, trying to make sense of the feeling blooming in her chest. It felt like betrayal and salvation all at once. That night after James had ridden off and Ethan was asleep, Clara sat in Thomas's study, going through his papers by lamplight. She'd avoided this room since his death, the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco too painful to bear. But now she forced herself to focus, searching through receipts, letters, anything that might help. She found their marriage certificate, his elegant handwriting next to her careful script, letters from his mother back east, disapproving of his choice to ranch in Texas. The deed to the property edges worn from his habit of taking it out and looking at it, still amazed that he owned land. Then in a box she'd never seen before, hidden behind other documents, she found something that made her blood run cold. A letter in Thomas's handwriting but never sent, dated a week before his death. My dearest Clara, it began. If you are reading this, then my fears have come to pass. Dalton came to me with an offer I refused. He made threats I didn't want to worry you with. But if something happens to me, know that it was not an accident. The creek water made me sick, but I believe it was poisoned. I should have told you, but I wanted to protect you. Forgive me. Fight for our son's inheritance. Don't let them win. Clara's hands shook as she read and reread the letter. Thomas hadn't died from a fever. He'd been murdered. Rage pure and burning flooded through her. Dalton had killed her husband, and now he was trying to steal what he'd died protecting. A sound from outside made her look up. Hoofbeats approaching fast, too soon for James to be returning. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. Fire! The eastern pasture was ablaze, flames racing through the dry grass toward the barn. Even as she watched, she saw riders silhouetted against the flames, whooping and shooting into the air. Clara ran, shouting for Ethan to stay inside. She had to save the horses. The cattle were in the north pasture, safe for now, but the horses were in the barn, and the fire was moving fast. She threw open the barn doors, smoke already making her eyes water. The horses were panicking, screaming and kicking at their stalls. She grabbed lead ropes, working frantically to get them out. The first horse bolted past her into the night. The second followed. But James's horse, still limping, was frozen with terror. "Come on," she begged, tugging at the rope. "Please come on." The smoke was thicker now, flames visible through the gaps in the barn walls. The horse finally moved, following her out, just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. Clara stood in the yard, coughing, watching her barn burn. The riders were gone, their work done. In the distance, she could see other fires starting her hay stores, the seed shed. Ethan appeared beside her, tears streaming down his face. "Mama, why are they doing this?" She pulled him close, her own tears mixing with the ash on her face. "Because they're evil, baby. Because they think they can break us." "Will they—" Clara thought of Thomas's letter of James riding through the night to help her, of Mary and Henrik and the others who'd stood with her today. "No," she said fiercely. "They won't." They fought the fires with buckets and blankets, managing to save the house and most of the outbuildings, but the barn was gone along with their winter hay supply. As dawn broke, Clara stood among the ashes, exhausted and filthy, surveying the damage. Mary arrived first, took one look at the destruction, and started organizing. "Samuel, ride to town. Get whoever will come. We're rebuilding today." "Mary, I can't nothing. You think you're the first woman to have her barn burned by cowards? We've all been through it one way or another. Now we stand together, or we all fall separately." By noon, wagons were arriving. Not many Dalton's influence kept some away, but enough. Henrik brought lumber he'd been saving. The minister brought his congregation's work crew. Even Agnes Henderson's sister came from Carson County, a stack of old letters in her wagon. "Found these," she said, handing them to Clara. Agnes wrote about the property lines, even drew a map once showing where the old Spanish marker stone was. "See, right there by the creek bend, marking the eastern boundary of your land, not Dalton's." Clara studied the crude but clear map dated 15 years ago. It was exactly what they needed. As the barn frame began to rise again, built by neighbors who knew that tomorrow it might be their turn to need help. James returned. His horse was lathered with sweat, and he himself looked exhausted, but his eyes were bright with triumph. "Found it," he said, pulling papers from his saddlebag. "County records from 1842, original Spanish land grant. The eastern boundary is marked by the stone of 3 faces where the creek bends north. That stone is on your land, always has been." Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. "We can prove it's ours. We can prove it's always been yours." His expression darkened as he took in the burned barn, the exhausted people rebuilding. "What happened?" "Night riders. Carver's men probably, though we couldn't prove it." Something dangerous flickered in James's eyes. "Anyone hurt?" "No, we lost the barn, the hay, but they'll pay for this." The quiet certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in months. That evening, as the new barn frame stood skeletal against the sunset, the helpers began to leave. Each promised to return tomorrow, and Clara knew they would. This was how people survived out here together, or not at all. James was helping Ethan carry salvaged tools when the boy suddenly asked, "Mr. James, are you going to marry my mama?" Clara nearly dropped the bucket she was carrying. "Ethan, you can't just— Why not?" Ethan looked genuinely confused. "He's here helping like a papa would, and he looks at you the way papa used to." James knelt down to Ethan's level, his voice gentle. "Your papa was a good man, Ethan. No one could replace him." "I don't want you to replace him," Ethan said solemnly. "I just want Mama to stop being so sad. And she's not as sad when you're here." Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought for the second time in as many days. She busied herself with unnecessary tasks, unable to meet James's eyes. Later, after Ethan was in bed, she found James standing guard again, watching the darkness. "I'm sorry about what Ethan said. He doesn't understand." "He understands more than you think." James turned to her. "Children see things clear without all the complications adults add. It's not that simple. Isn't it?" He stepped closer and Clara's breath caught. "I know what I feel, Clara. I knew it the moment I saw you standing on that porch ready to take on the world alone rather than surrender. James, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I want you to know where I stand." He reached out carefully, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "I'd stand with you against Dalton Carver and the devil himself, not because you need me to, but because I want to." Clara's heart was racing. "I lost Thomas less than a year ago, and you'll mourn him for the rest of your life. That's how it should be. But mourning doesn't mean you stop living." She thought of Thomas's letter, his wish for her to fight to survive. Would he want her to do it alone? The hearing is in 3 days, she said, changing the subject to safer ground. James accepted the deflection gracefully. We'll be ready. Dalton won't expect you to have documentation. He also won't accept losing. No, James agreed. He won't. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Clara practiced what she would say at the hearing while James and Henrik finished the barn. Mary coordinated with the others, ensuring they would all be at the courthouse for support. The night before the hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She walked out to find James as she knew she would standing watch. You should rest, he said. So should you. They stood together in comfortable silence watching the stars. Finally, Clara spoke. I found a letter from Thomas. He knew Dalton was going to kill him. James went very still. Clara. He was poisoned. The fever was just what finished him off. Her voice was steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. Dalton murdered my husband, and tomorrow I have to stand in the same room with him and be civil. James turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You want justice. I want revenge, she admitted. I want him to lose everything the way he took everything from me. Then we make sure you win tomorrow. We take his water rights legally, publicly, and then we watch him make a mistake because men like Dalton always do when they're desperate. And if he doesn't make a mistake, James's expression was hard as granite. Then we help him make one. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and hot. Clara dressed in her best dress, the black one from Thomas's funeral, freshly cleaned and pressed. Ethan wore his Sunday clothes, looking older than his 6 years. You look beautiful, Mama, he said solemnly. Thank you, sweetheart. James appeared in the doorway and Clara's breath caught. He'd shaved, revealing a strong jawline she'd only glimpsed before. His clothes were clean and pressed, and he looked every inch a respectable rancher rather than a drifter. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be. The ride to town was quiet, but Clara drew strength from James's steady presence beside her. As they approached the courthouse, she saw the crowd gathered outside. Word had spread about the hearing, and it seemed half the county had come to watch. Dalton was already there, surrounded by his men and a sharp-dressed lawyer from Austin. He smiled when he saw Clara, the expression predatory. Mrs. Hayes, I do hope you haven't wasted money on legal representation you can't afford. I don't need a lawyer to speak the truth, Mr. Dalton. Inside the courthouse was packed. Judge Porter, old and supposedly impartial, sat behind his bench looking uncomfortable. Clara knew he'd probably been offered bribes from Dalton, but was too cautious to take them outright. The hearing began with Dalton's lawyer presenting their case. Smooth, professional, he laid out documents suggesting the boundary had always been further west, giving Dalton control of the creek. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood, her voice clear and strong, and began presenting her evidence. The Spanish land grant, the Henderson letters, the church record showing marriages and baptisms that referenced the boundary stones. These documents clearly show, she concluded, that the boundary has always been where my husband believed it to be, Mr. Dalton's claim is based on falsified documents created solely to steal what belongs to my son. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Dalton's face was turning red, his lawyer frantically whispering in his ear. Judge Porter called for order. These are serious allegations, Mrs. Hayes. Yes, Your Honor, as serious as the murder of my husband. The explosion of shocked voices was deafening. Dalton shot to his feet. How dare you? I have a letter. Clara continued, pulling out Thomas's final message. Written by my husband before his death, stating that Mr. Dalton had threatened him and that he believed he was being poisoned. The judge took the letter, reading it slowly. The courtroom was dead silent. Finally, Porter looked up. Mr. Dalton, these are grave accusations. They're the ravings of a sick man and a desperate woman, Dalton snarled. She'd say anything to keep land she can't manage. I can manage my land just fine, Clara shot back, which is why you're so determined to steal it. Order? The judge banged his gavel. Based on the evidence presented, I find in favor of Mrs. Hayes regarding the water rights. The boundary stands as originally surveyed. The courtroom erupted. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief, and James's hand steadied her elbow. But Dalton wasn't finished. His face was purple with rage as he stood. This isn't over, he said, his voice carrying over the noise. You think you've won a woman who entertains drifters in her barn, who corrupts her son with improper influences. His eyes fixed on James with naked hatred. Accidents happen, Mrs. Hayes, to you, to your boy, to anyone who stands with you. The threat was clear, public, and undeniable. Sheriff Morrison stood up. Mr. Dalton, I'll have to ask you to come with me. For what? Dalton laughed. Speaking my mind. For threatening a widow and her child in front of 50 witnesses, Morrison replied steadily. That's enough for a night in jail to cool off at minimum. As Dalton was led away still shouting threats, Clara felt the adrenaline leave her body in a rush. She'd won, but the victory felt hollow. Dalton wouldn't stop. Men like him never did. Outside the courthouse, their supporters surrounded them with congratulations. But Clara noticed the worried looks, the awareness that this was far from over. That night, they celebrated quietly at the ranch. Mary had brought food. Henrik brought his fiddle, and for a few hours, they pretended things were normal. Ethan fell asleep to the sound of music and laughter, something that had been absent too long. As the guests prepared to leave, Henrik pulled James aside. Clara couldn't hear what they said, but she saw James nod grimly. What was that about? She asked after everyone had gone. Henrik's heard rumors. Dalton's put a bounty on me. $50 to whoever runs me off or puts me in the ground. Clara's blood ran cold. You have to leave. No. James, please, I can't have your death on my conscience too. He took her hands in his. I'm not Thomas, Clara. I'm not a good man who can be poisoned in secret. Dalton wants to come for me. Let him come. You can't face them all alone. Who says I'll be alone? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've got more friends than you know, and Dalton's got more enemies. Man like that, he's made a lot of widows over the years. They remember. That night, Clara stood at her window watching James patrol. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd planned, the dreams that had died with him. Then she thought about the future, uncertain and dangerous, but no longer hopeless. She'd won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Dalton would come with Carver and all his hired guns. They'd come with fire and bullets and all the violence money could buy. But they'd find something they didn't expect. They'd find a woman who'd already lost everything and survived. They'd find a community tired of being bullied. And they'd find James Ryland, whoever he really was, whatever his past held. Clara touched the window glass, watching the man who'd appeared from nowhere to stand with her. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, next week, next month. But for tonight, she wasn't alone, and that was enough. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, bringing the smell of distant rain. Change was coming to West Texas one way or another. The rain that Clara had smelled on the wind never came. Instead, the next morning brought riders, but not the ones she expected. 3 women approached the ranch, their faces weathered by sun and sorrow. Clara recognized the lead rider immediately, Martha Donnelly, whose husband had died under mysterious circumstances after refusing to sell water rights to Dalton 2 years ago. Mrs. Hayes, Martha said, dismounting with practiced ease, we need to talk. The other 2 women were Sarah Banks and Ruth Coleman, both widows whose husbands had crossed Dalton in one way or another. They sat at Clara's kitchen table like a council of war, which Clara supposed they were. We heard what happened at the courthouse, Martha began. Dalton threatening you publicly, the sheriff actually standing up to him for once. It won't last, Sarah added bitterly. Morrison's got family to think about. He'll back down when push comes to shove. Ruth, the youngest of them at barely 25, leaned forward. But we won't. We're tired of that man taking whatever he wants, killing whoever stands in his way. Clara poured coffee with steady hands. What are you proposing, Ceci? Fight back, Martha said simply. Not just defend, actually fight back. Dalton's got maybe 15 hired guns, including Carver's bunch. But there's 37 families he's wronged over the years. If even half stand together. They won't, Clara interrupted. People are scared, and they have reason to be. They weren't scared yesterday, Ruth pointed out. They came to rebuild your barn. They stood with you at the courthouse. James entered from outside, having heard the voices. The women tensed at his presence, but Martha studied him with shrewd eyes. You're the drifter who's got Dalton so riled up. James Ryland, ma'am. I know who you are, Martha said quietly. Or rather, I know who you were. My brother lived down in the Brazos River country. Told me about a James Ryland who stood up to the Brazos Land Company. Killed 4 of their hired guns in a fair fight when they came for his family's farm. The kitchen went silent. Clara looked at James, seeing him in a new light. "That why you're drifting?" Sarah asked. "The company put a bounty on me, $500 dead or alive. Figured it was better to disappear than bring trouble to anyone else." James met Clara's eyes. "Seems trouble found me anyway." "Or you found it," Martha observed. "Either way, you've got experience we need. Dalton's bringing in more guns, riders from Mexico, killers who won't balk at anything. We need to be ready." Clara felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. "If we do this, if we actually organize resistance, people will die." "People are already dying," Ruth said fiercely. "My husband died of pneumonia 2 days after refusing to sell to Dalton. Martha's died in a riding accident. Sarah's in a barn fire. How many more accidents before we say enough?" Before anyone could answer, Ethan burst through the door. "Mama riders coming, lots of them." Everyone moved at once, grabbing weapons, taking positions. But as the dust cloud resolved into individual riders, Clara saw it wasn't an attack. It was Henrik with his sons, Pastor Williams, with several men from his congregation, and surprisingly Sheriff Morrison with 2 deputies. They gathered in the yard, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. Morrison looked uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Hayes, I've got something to say, and I need everyone to hear it." He removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. "I've been sheriff for 12 years. Spent most of that time trying to keep peace by not rocking the boat. But yesterday, when Dalton threatened a child in my courthouse," he paused, jaw tight. "There's a line. He crossed it." "What are you saying, Sheriff?" James asked. "I'm saying the law is going to actually mean something around here for once. Anyone rides against Mrs. Hayes or any other law-abiding citizen, they'll answer to me." "Dalton owns half your deputies," Martha said skeptically. "Not these 2. Morrison indicated the men with him. "And I've got promises from 5 others who are tired of being treated like Dalton's private army." Henrik stepped forward. "Is good start, but not enough. Dalton has maybe 15-20 guns. We need more." "Then we recruit more," James said. "But not for attacking, for defending. We make it clear that anyone who rides against innocent families will face consequences." "You're talking about vigilante justice," Morrison said uneasily. "I'm talking about survival," James replied. "You can't arrest men for crimes you can't prove, Sheriff, but we can make it costly enough that they think twice." As they debated strategy, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, riding hard. As he got closer, Clara recognized Samuel Mary's grandson. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his face was white with fear. "They got my grandma," he gasped out. "Carver and his men took her from her house, left a message." Clara's blood turned to ice. "What message?" Samuel handed her a piece of paper with shaking hands. The writing was crude but clear. "The old woman for the drifter. Midnight. Clear Creek Crossing. Come alone or she dies." The group erupted in angry voices, but Clara heard none of it. She was looking at James, seeing the decision already made in his eyes. "No," she said firmly. "You're not going. It's me they want. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap, but they have Mary." He turned to the others. "I'll need someone to come with me, stay hidden. When they release Mary—" "They won't release her," Martha said bluntly. "They'll kill you both." "Maybe, but I have to try." Morrison cleared his throat. "As sheriff, I can't condone this. As a man who's known Mary Patterson for 30 years, I'll be positioned a quarter-mile north with my best rifle." "I'll take the south approach," Henrik volunteered. "The church bell tower has a clear view of the crossing," Pastor Williams added quietly. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "I may be a man of God, but the Bible says there's a time for everything, including justice." They spent the rest of the day planning, but Clara could barely focus. The thought of losing James, of Mary being hurt because of her situation was unbearable. As the sun began to set, she found herself alone with James in the barn. "There has to be another way," she said. "If there was, we'd take it." He was checking his revolver movements, precise and practiced. "Clara, if something happens, don't. Listen to me." He set the gun down, taking her hands. If something happens to me, you take Ethan and go east. Today proved you have friends who will help. Don't stay and fight a war you can't win. You're asking me to run. I'm asking you to survive. For Ethan. Clara pulled her hands away. You don't get to ride into my life, make me feel... She stopped, unable to voice what she felt. You don't get to do that and then ride off to die. Clara. She kissed him. It was desperate and fierce, nothing like the gentle kisses she'd shared with Thomas. This was fire and need and the terror of loss all mixed together. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Come back, she whispered. Whatever happens, come back. I will. But they both knew promises were fragile things in a world where good men died of poisoned water and widows fought range wars. The moon was rising as James prepared to leave. The men were already in position, and Clara stood on the porch with Ethan asleep inside, unaware of the danger surrounding them all. Wait, she said suddenly. Take this. She handed him Thomas's watch, the one thing of value she'd kept. For luck. James pocketed it without argument, understanding the gesture's significance. Then he mounted his horse and rode off toward Clear Creek, toward a trap everyone could see, but no one could prevent. Clara went inside and got her rifle. If James thought she was going to sit and wait while he risked his life, he didn't know her at all. She saddled her horse quietly and rode out, taking a longer route she knew from years of living on this land. The crossing at Clear Creek was an open area where the banks widened, creating a natural amphitheater, perfect for an ambush. Clara positioned herself on a rise overlooking the scene hidden among rocks and scrub brush. She didn't have long to wait. James arrived first, as expected, dismounting, but keeping his horse close. Then came the riders from the opposite direction, 6 men with Mary on a horse, hands tied a gag in her mouth. Carver rode forward, his gold teeth gleaming in the moonlight. Well, well, the famous James Ryland. Or should I say the infamous James Ryland $500 bounty I heard. Dalton's 50 is just a bonus. Let the woman go, James said calmly. Oh, I will. After you drop your gun and come with us. Dalton wants to have a conversation with you, private-like. We both know how that conversation ends. True, but you've got a choice. Come peaceful, the old woman goes free. Fight, and she dies first, then you, then we ride back for the Hayes woman and her boy. Clara's finger found her trigger. She could take Carver from here, but the others would kill Mary before anyone else could react. James slowly reached for his gun and Clara's heart sank. He was going to surrender. But as his hand moved to his holster, a shot rang out from the north. Morrison. One of Carver's men cried out, clutching his shoulder. In the confusion, James drew and fired in one smooth motion, taking down another gunman. Everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions as Henrik and Pastor Williams opened fire. James dove for cover, still shooting. Mary's horse, spooked by the gunfire, bolted with her still tied to the saddle. Clara didn't think. She spurred her horse down the slope, racing after Mary. She heard shouts behind her, bullets whining past, but kept riding. She caught up to Mary's horse, grabbing the reins and bringing both animals to a stop. Hold on, she told Mary, cutting the ropes with her knife. Mary pulled off the gag. You fool girl, what are you doing here? Saving your stubborn hide. Can you ride? Can I? Of course I can ride. They turned back toward the crossing where the gunfight was still raging. In the moonlight, Clara could see bodies on the ground but couldn't tell whose. Then she saw James pinned behind a boulder, 2 gunmen advancing on his position. Without hesitation, Clara raised her rifle and fired. One man went down. Mary, using Clara's pistol, shot the other. Behind you, Mary shouted. Clara turned to see Carver himself bearing down on them, his face twisted with rage. His gun was aimed at her heart, and she knew with cold certainty that she wouldn't be able to bring her rifle around in time. The shot that rang out seemed impossibly loud. Clara waited for the impact, the pain, but neither came. Instead, Carver jerked in his saddle, a look of surprise on his face. He toppled from his horse, and behind him, Clara saw James' smoking gun still raised. The remaining gunmen, seeing Carver fall, broke and ran. The sudden silence was deafening. James rushed to Clara, pulling her from her horse hands, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? What were you thinking? I was thinking you needed help, she replied, trying to sound calmer than she felt. You could have been killed. So could you. Mary interrupted their argument. You're both fools but brave ones. Now can we get out of here before those cowards come back with reinforcements?" They regrouped at the Hayes Ranch where Ruth and the other women were waiting armed and ready. Morrison had taken a bullet in the arm but would survive. One of Henrik's sons had a graze on his leg. Miraculously, those were the only injuries on their side. 4 dead, Morrison reported grimly, including Carver. The others ran, but they'll be back. "Let them come," Martha said fiercely. "We showed them tonight that we won't be victims anymore." But James was looking troubled. "Dalton won't let this stand. He'll bring everything he has." "Then we need to be ready," Clara said. She looked around at the assembled group: widows, farmers, a sheriff, a minister, a drifter. Not much of an army, but it was theirs. "Spread the word. Anyone who's tired of living in fear, anyone who wants to stand up to Dalton, they're welcome here." Over the next 2 days, people trickled in. Some brought weapons, others food and supplies. The Hendricks family who'd lost land to Dalton years ago. The Youngs whose well had mysteriously gone dry after they refused to sell. By the time Dalton's response came, 38 people were camped at the Hayes Ranch. The response came in the form of fire. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Ethan's terrified screams. The southern pasture was ablaze, and riders with torches were circling, setting fires faster than they could be fought. "They're trying to burn us out," someone shouted. James organized the defense with military precision. "Women and children to the house. Henrik, take 5 men and protect the well. They'll try to destroy our water supply." "Morrison, can your men provide covering fire?" "Already on it." Clara found herself in the thick of it, beating at flames with wet blankets alongside the other women. The heat was infernal smoke choking, but they fought with desperate determination. Through the chaos, she saw him, Dalton himself, sitting on his horse on a ridge, watching his handiwork with satisfaction. Their eyes met across the distance, and he touched his hat mockingly. Rage flooded through her. This man had killed her husband, threatened her child, burned her land, and he sat there untouchable, protected by his wealth and influence. "James," she called out, "Dalton's on the ridge." James looked, then shook his head. "Too far for a clean shot, and he knows it. He's baiting us." But Clara was already moving, grabbing Thomas's hunting rifle, the one he'd taught her to shoot with years ago. It had better range than a regular rifle, though she'd have only 1 shot. "Clara, no." James tried to stop her, but she was already lining up the shot. The world narrowed to just her and Dalton. The smoke, the screams, the fire, all of it faded away. She thought of Thomas poisoned and dying, of Ethan growing up without a father, of all the widows Dalton had made over the years. She squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the burning landscape. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Dalton jerked, clutching his shoulder, nearly falling from his horse. His men surrounded him, and they retreated rapidly. A cheer went up from the defenders, but Clara felt no triumph. She'd wounded him, not killed him. And wounded animals were the most dangerous. They fought the fires through the night, managing to save the house, and most of the outbuildings, though the pastures were destroyed. As dawn broke, they stood among the ashes, exhausted and filthy, but alive. "He'll come again," Morrison said. "And next time it won't be fire. It'll be bullets." "Then we meet bullets with bullets," James replied. Pastor Williams, his face streaked with soot, raised his voice. "I need to say something. I've preached peace my whole life. Turn the other cheek. Love thy enemy. But there comes a time when good people must stand against evil, or evil wins. I believe God brought us together for this moment, to finally say no more." "Pretty words, preacher," Martha said. "But Dalton's got professional killers. We've got farmers and widows." "We've got right on our side," Ruth added. "Right doesn't stop bullets," Sarah countered. As they argued, a rider approached under a white flag. It was Fitzgerald from the bank, looking nervous but determined. "Mrs. Hayes," he called out, staying at a safe distance, "I have a message from Mr. Dalton." "Deliver it and go," Clara replied coldly. Fitzgerald cleared his throat. "Mr. Dalton is willing to make one final offer. Leave. All of you. Take what you can carry and leave Texas. He'll pay reasonable prices for your lands and promise safe passage. And if we refuse, then he's hired 20 additional men from Mexico, professional soldiers. They'll be here in 3 days. Anyone still here after that?" He shrugged helplessly. I'm just the messenger, Mrs. Hayes, but please consider your son." After Fitzgerald left, the group was quiet. 20 additional guns would make it 40 against their 38, and many of theirs were women and older men. "Maybe we should consider," someone began. "No." Ethan's voice cut through the murmur. Everyone turned to look at the 6-year-old boy standing straight and tall despite the fear in his eyes. "My papa wouldn't run. Mama won't run. And neither will I." Clara's throat tightened with pride and terror in equal measure. "Ethan, I may be little, but I can help. I can carry water, load guns, watch for riders. This is our home. We stay." James knelt beside the boy. "You're brave, son. Your father would be proud." "He is proud," Ethan said with simple faith. "He watches us from heaven. He knows we're doing what's right." That settled it. If a 6-year-old could stand firm, how could grown folks do less? They spent the next 3 days preparing. Trenches were dug, barricades built. Women who'd never held guns learned to shoot. Plans were made, contingencies discussed. James worked tirelessly, and Clara saw how naturally people followed his commands. This wasn't his first battle, that was clear, but she also saw the weight it put on him, the knowledge that people would die following his orders. The night before Dalton's deadline, Clara found James standing watch, as she knew she would. "Can we win?" she asked simply. "Honestly, the odds aren't good. They have more men, better weapons, and they don't care about casualties." He turned to her. "But sometimes the fight itself is the victory. Standing up saying no more that matters, win or lose." "I don't want to lose you," she admitted. "I already lost one man I loved. I can't—" "You won't," he promised, pulling her close. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." They stood there holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring blood and thunder, victory or defeat. But tonight they had this moment, this connection that had grown from suspicious strangers to something deeper than either had expected. "James," Clara whispered, "that first day when you came here with your injured horse, was it really coincidence?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No, I'd heard about you in town. The widow fighting Dalton alone. Something about it called to me. Maybe because I'd been running so long I needed to find something worth standing still for. And you found it." "I found you," he said simply. "You and Ethan. A family worth fighting for, even if it's not mine." "It could be," Clara said, her heart racing. "When this is over, it could be yours too." Before he could respond, a shout went up from the watchpost. "Riders, they're coming." But it wasn't Dalton's army. It was a single wagon driven by someone Clara had never expected to see again. Thomas's brother Michael, who'd gone to California 3 years ago. Michael climbed down from the wagon, travel-worn but determined. "Clara, I got your letter. I'm sorry it took so long, but I brought help." From the back of the wagon climbed 6 men, all armed, all bearing the weathered look of fighters. "These are friends from the goldfields," Michael explained. "When they heard what was happening, they volunteered to come. There's also this." He pulled out a strongbox and opened it. Gold gleamed in the lamplight. "Thomas's share of our claim. He never told you, but we struck a vein just before he died. There's enough here to pay off the bank 3 times over, and to hire our own fighters if needed." Clara stared at the gold, then at Michael. "Thomas knew. He was going to surprise you, wanted to wait until we were sure the claim would hold." Michael's face was grim. "I should have come sooner. When I heard he died, I thought it was just fever." "But your letter, what you said about Dalton Thomas was murdered, wasn't he?" "Yes." Michael nodded slowly. "Then we make Dalton pay. For Thomas and for everyone else he's hurt." The gold changed everything and nothing. Clara could pay off the bank now, but Dalton wouldn't care. This had gone beyond money or land. This was about power, about a man who couldn't stand being defied. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it a dust cloud on the horizon. Dalton's army was coming. Clara stood with her people, for that's what they'd become, her people, watching the approaching riders. 43 of them, she counted, armed and ready for war. They stopped just outside rifle range. Dalton rode forward, his arm in a sling from Clara's bullet, his face twisted with pain and fury. "Last chance," he called out. "Surrender now, and I'll let the women and children leave safely." Here's our answer. Clara shouted back and fired a shot that kicked up dust at his horse's feet. Dalton retreated, and for a moment there was silence. Then with a roar, his men charged. The battle that followed would be remembered in Texas history as the Clear Creek Stand, farmers and widows, cowboys and preachers standing against hired killers and corrupt power. Clara fought alongside James, their rifles singing a deadly duet. She saw Henrik's son Eric take a bullet but keep fighting, saw Ruth Coleman, sweet Ruth, who'd never harmed anyone, shoot two men who tried to flank their position, saw Pastor Williams praying and reloading, praying and shooting. The tide turned when Sheriff Morrison's promised deputies arrived, not 5 but 12, having decided that the law meant something after all. Then came more riders from town, men and women who'd heard about the stand and decided they'd been silent too long. By noon, Dalton's forces were in retreat, their leader captured when his horse was shot from under him. 17 of his men were dead, the rest scattered or surrendered. The cost on Clara's side was heavy too, 3 dead, 8 wounded. But they'd won. They'd stood against tyranny and won. As Dalton was led away in chains, he passed Clara. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I have lawyers, influence." "You have nothing," Clara interrupted. "Your men are dead or fled, your reputation is destroyed, and you'll hang for murdering my husband." "You can't prove—" "Bill Carver kept records," Morrison said. "Found them in his saddlebags, details of every job including poisoning Thomas Hayes on your orders. You'll hang Dalton, legal and proper." The fight went out of Dalton, then his face aging 10 years in seconds. He was led away and Clara knew she'd never see him again. Justice long delayed had finally come. That evening, as the wounded were tended and the dead mourned, Clara stood with James overlooking their land. The pastures were burned, the barn rebuilt but empty of hay, the future uncertain. "We won," James said quietly. "We survived," Clara corrected. "Now we have to rebuild." "We—" She turned to him. "You're staying, aren't you?" "The Brazos Land Company thinks you're dead. You could start over here, with us." James was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out Thomas's watch, offering it back to her. "Keep it," Clara said. "Thomas would want the man who protected his family to have it." "Is that what I am?" "The man who protected his family." "You're the man who stood with us when no one else would." "The man my son looks up to." "The man I—" She stopped, then forced herself to continue. "The man I love." James pulled her close, and she could feel his heart beating against hers. "I love you too, Clara. You and Ethan both. If you'll have me—" "Yes," she said simply. They were married a month later after Dalton's trial and hanging. The whole county came to the wedding celebrating not just a union, but a victory over fear and oppression. Michael stayed to help rebuild the ranch, using the gold from California to buy cattle and repair the damage. Other families who'd fled Dalton's reign of terror returned, and the community grew stronger. On their wedding night, as Clara and James stood on the porch of their home watching the stars, Ethan came out to join them. "Are you my papa now?" he asked James. James knelt down to the boy's level. "I'll never replace your real papa, Ethan, but if you'll let me, I'd be honored to be your father now." Ethan considered this with 6-year-old seriousness, then hugged James tight. "Papa James, I like that." As the three of them stood together, a family forged in fire and struggle. Clara thought about the long road that had brought them here. The loss, the pain, the desperate fights, all of it had led to this moment. The weeks following their wedding brought a peace Clara had almost forgotten existed. James proved himself not just as a husband, but as a father to Ethan, teaching him to rope cattle and track deer skills Thomas had planned to pass on. But peace in West Texas was always temporary, like morning dew that vanished under the harsh sun. The trouble started with a letter that arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was teaching Ethan his numbers while James worked with Michael on expanding the barn when Sheriff Morrison rode up, his face grim beneath the brim of his hat. "We need to talk," he said, dismounting slowly. "All of you." They gathered in the kitchen and Morrison pulled out an official-looking document. "This came from Austin today. Dalton's lawyers filed an appeal before his execution. They're claiming the trial was invalid because I arrested him under duress, that the whole town conspired against him." "That's absurd," Michael protested. He confessed to murder in front of witnesses. His lawyers are saying that confession was coerced, that the town formed an illegal vigilante group that violated his rights. Morrison's jaw tightened. There's more. They're claiming you, James, are wanted for murder in Brazos County and shouldn't have been allowed to testify. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The Brazos Land Company has deep pockets and long memories, James finished quietly. They found me. The judge in Austin wants you to appear for questioning, Morrison continued. Both of you. If you don't show, they'll issue warrants. It's a trap, Michael said immediately. Get them away from here, away from everyone who supports them. James stood pacing to the window. If we don't go, we're fugitives. They'll send marshals, maybe even the rangers. Everyone who helped us becomes an accomplice. If you do go, you might not come back, Morrison warned. Dalton's lawyers are some of the best in Texas, and the Brazos Land Company has judges in their pockets. Clara looked at Ethan, who was listening with wide eyes, understanding more than a 6-year-old should have to. She'd fought so hard to keep this land for him, to give him a future. Now that future hung by a thread again. When? She asked. 2 weeks. The hearing is set for October 15th. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She found James on the porch, keeping watch out of habit more than necessity. We could run, she said softly. Take Ethan and Michael go to California. Start over where no one knows us. Is that what you want? Clara considered it the temptation of a clean slate, a life without constant struggle. No, this is our home, Ethan's inheritance. We stand and fight whatever comes. James pulled her close. The Brazos Land Company won't stop. Even if we win in Austin, they'll keep coming. $500 is a lot of money. Then we make it cost them more than that to collect. Over the next days, an unexpected ally emerged. Judge Porter, who'd presided over the water rights hearing, arrived at the ranch with a proposition. I've been thinking about retiring, he said, settling his considerable bulk into a chair. But I'd hate to leave the bench to someone Dalton's people might control. I have influence in Austin connections that go back 30 years. I could help, but I need something in return. Name it, Clara said. Support for my nephew to replace me as local judge. He's young but honest, and more importantly, he can't be bought. That's all, Porter smiled. That and the truth about something. James Ryland, are you the same man who killed 4 Brazos Land Company men 3 years ago? James met his gaze steadily. I am. Were they trying to steal your family's land? They were. They'd already burned our barn with my sister's family inside. I did what I had to do. Porter nodded slowly. Self-defense, then. That's what I'll argue in Austin. A man has a right to protect his family and property. The company won't see it that way. The company doesn't run Texas despite what they think. Porter stood. I'll right ahead start talking to people. When you arrive, you won't be walking into a completely hostile courtroom. The 2 weeks passed too quickly. Clara made arrangements for Ethan to stay with Mary Patterson, though the boy protested fiercely. I should come with you, he insisted. I can tell them what Mr. Dalton did. Your job is to help Uncle Michael and Mrs. Patterson take care of the ranch, Clara said firmly. We need to know it's in good hands. The morning they left, half the county turned out to see them off. Martha Donnelly pressed a small pistol into Clara's hands. Just in case, she said. Austin's a big city, lots of dark alleys. Henrik offered his own gift, a letter signed by 43 citizens testifying to James's character and Clara's integrity. We stand with you, he said simply. All of us. The journey to Austin took 4 days each mile, taking them further from home and deeper into uncertainty. James was quiet, watchful, his hand never far from his gun. Clara understood. They were riding into enemy territory where money and influence mattered more than truth. Austin was bigger than Clara had imagined, bustling with politicians, businessmen, and opportunists. They found lodging at a respectable boarding house that Judge Porter had recommended, run by a widow named Mrs. Clearwater, who took one look at them and said, You're the folks standing up to the land companies. Good. Someone needs to. The night before the hearing, an unexpected visitor arrived. Clara answered the knock to find a well-dressed woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Ryland, I'm Elizabeth Brazos. Clara's hand went to the pistol in her pocket. Brazos, as in The Brazos Land Company, my late husband's creation now run by our son. The woman's expression was unreadable. May I come in? Against her better judgment, Clara let her enter. James stood when he saw her tension radiating from him. You're the one who killed my husband's men, Elizabeth said to him. They killed my sister, her husband, and their 2 children first, James replied evenly. Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly. I know, I found out after. My husband never told me the whole truth about his business dealings. By the time I learned, it was too late to stop the bounty on you. Why are you here? Clara asked. Because my son is making the same mistakes his father did, believing that money gives him the right to take whatever he wants. I couldn't stop my husband, but perhaps I can stop my son. She pulled out a leather folder. These are documents showing that the attack on your family's farm was unauthorized by the company board. My husband acted alone using company resources for a personal vendetta. It won't erase the bounty, but it might help your case. James studied the papers. Why would you help us? Because I have to live with what my husband did. 4 orphaned children dead because of greed. I can't bring them back, but I can try to prevent more bloodshed. She stood to leave, then paused. Be careful tomorrow. My son has hired men to ensure you never make it to the courthouse. After she left, Clara and James sat in stunned silence. It could be a trap, Clara finally said. Could be. Or it could be a mother trying to atone for her family's sins. They spent the night preparing checking weapons, planning routes. Neither slept much, too aware of the danger waiting in the morning. Dawn came gray and drizzly, unusual for October. They left early, taking a circuitous route to the courthouse. Good thing, too, they spotted men watching their boarding house, obviously waiting to ambush them. The courthouse was an imposing building of limestone and authority. Inside the hallways were packed with spectators. Word had spread about the hearing, and it seemed everyone wanted to witness the showdown between common folk and the land companies. The courtroom itself was standing room only. Clara recognized some faces, Judge Porter near the front, looking confident. Sheriff Morrison had made the journey too, bringing his 2 most trusted deputies. But there were many more strangers, and not all looked friendly. The opposing lawyers were exactly what Clara had expected, smooth, polished men in expensive suits who looked at her and James like they were dirt to be swept aside. Dalton himself was there, shackled but smirking, confident his money would buy freedom. The lead prosecutor, a man named Worthington, began with passionate rhetoric about the lawlessness of frontier justice, the danger of allowing common people to take the law into their own hands. He painted Dalton as a successful businessman persecuted by jealous neighbors, and James as a violent criminal who'd corrupted an entire town. When it was their turn, the lawyer Judge Porter had arranged a young man named Patterson, no relation to Mary, stood nervously. But when he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. Gentlemen of the court, we're here today not to debate law, but to discuss justice. Real justice, not the kind that can be bought and sold. He presented the evidence methodically. The poisoned water that killed Thomas. Carver's detailed records. The testimonies of dozens of citizens. And finally, Elizabeth Brazos's documents. The courtroom erupted when those were presented. Worthington objected furiously, but the judge, an older man with tired eyes, allowed them. Clara was called to testify first. She told her story simply, without embellishment: the death of her husband, the threats, the attacks, the attempted theft of her land. Mrs. Ryland. Worthington cross-examined, his tone condescending. Isn't it true that you married James Ryland mere weeks after this supposed battle? Quite convenient, wouldn't you say? I married him because I love him, Clara replied steadily. And because he stood with me when no one else would. Or perhaps because you needed his gun to hold on to land you couldn't manage alone. Clara's temper flared. I managed that land alone for nearly a year after my husband's murder. I fought off rustlers, drought, and men like your client. James didn't save me, we saved each other. How touching. And this supposed murder of your first husband, do you have any proof beyond the conveniently discovered letter? I have the testimony of Dr. Marcus, who treated my husband. He's prepared to testify that the symptoms were consistent with arsenic poisoning. This was news to Worthington, who frantically whispered with his associates. James testified next, and Worthington went for the throat immediately. Mr. Ryland, you're wanted for killing 4 men in Brazos County. I killed 4 men who had just burned my sister's family alive. It was justice. It was murder. You took the law into your own hands. There was no law. The sheriff was bought and paid for by the Brazos Land Company. My choice was to let them get away with murdering children or stop them myself. So you admit you believe yourself above the law? James looked directly at the judge. I believe the law should protect innocent people. When it doesn't, when it's been corrupted by money and power, then people have a right to protect themselves. The hearing stretched through the day. Witness after witness testified Henrik about Dalton's threats. Mary Patterson about the night raids, even Pastor Williams about the spiritual corruption that greed had brought to their community. The tide turned when an unexpected witness appeared Fitzgerald from the bank. He looked terrified but determined. I have something to say, he announced. Mr. Dalton threatened my family if I didn't help him force Mrs. Hayes off her land. He said he'd ruin me, hurt my children. I'm not proud of what I did, but I won't lie for him anymore. He produced bank records showing Dalton had been systematically targeting landowners for years using intimidation, violence, and financial manipulation to build his empire. Dalton finally exploded. You can't trust these people. They're all in it together. That woman. He pointed at Clara. She's a witch who seduced that killer to help her steal what's rightfully mine. Nothing was ever rightfully yours, Clara said quietly. You took it all with blood and fear. The judge called for order. The closing arguments were passionate on both sides, but Clara could see the tide had turned. The spectators were with them, and more importantly, the judge seemed to be listening. It was nearly midnight when the verdict came. Regarding the charges against George Dalton, the judge began, the evidence of murder conspiracy and systematic criminal behavior is overwhelming. The original conviction stands. Execution will proceed as scheduled. Dalton screamed curses as he was dragged away. Regarding James Ryland and the matter of the Brazos County killings, this court finds that while Mr. Ryland's actions were outside the law, they were taken in immediate defense of family against murderous assault. No Texas jury would convict a man for defending his kin against killers. The warrant is hereby vacated. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Clara threw herself into James's arms, not caring about propriety or the watching crowd. But Worthington wasn't finished. Your Honor, the Brazos Land Company still maintains the bounty is a private matter. The Brazos Land Company, the judge interrupted, would be wise to withdraw that bounty immediately. This court has seen evidence of systematic criminal behavior by that organization. If they continue to pursue Mr. Ryland, I'll recommend a full investigation that could result in the company's dissolution. It was over. They'd won completely. Outside the courthouse in the drizzling rain, they were surrounded by well-wishers. Judge Porter shook James's hand. You two have done something important here, he said. You've shown that ordinary people can stand up to power and win. We couldn't have done it alone, Clara replied, thinking of all the people who'd risked everything to stand with them. The journey home was different from the journey out. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep exhaustion and a deeper relief. When they finally crested the hill overlooking their ranch, Clara nearly cried. Everything was as they'd left it. Michael and the others had kept it safe. Ethan came running before they'd even dismounted, launching himself at them with the abandon only a child could manage. You're home, Uncle Michael said you would be, but Mrs. Patterson was worried, and I told her you were too tough for those Austin folks. And I was right, wasn't I? You were right, James said, lifting the boy onto his shoulders. Your mama faced down lawyers scarier than any gunfighter. That evening, the ranch filled with neighbors coming to hear the news. The story was told and retold, growing with each telling. By the time Mary Patterson was done with it, Clara had single-handedly faced down the entire Texas legal system while James fought off 50 assassins. It wasn't quite like that, Clara protested, laughing. Close enough, Mary insisted. The important thing is you won. We all won. As the evening wound down, Clara found herself standing with Martha Donnelly and the other widows who'd first stood with her. You know what this means, Martha said. Others will hear about this. Other communities facing the same kind of oppression. They'll know it's possible to fight back. Let them come, Clara said. We'll tell them how it's done. Later, after everyone had gone home and Ethan was asleep, Clara and James stood on their porch looking out at their land. The burned pastures were showing new growth, green shoots pushing through the blackened earth. Elizabeth Brazos sent word, James said. The bounty's been withdrawn. Officially, I'm a free man. How does it feel? Like I can finally stop running. He pulled her close. Like I can finally build something instead of just surviving. We've already built something, Clara said, gesturing to the house, the land, the community that had rallied around them. A life. A family. A future. Your husband would be proud, James said softly, of what you've done, what you've protected. Clara thought of Thomas, of the dreams they'd shared, the life they'd planned. That life was gone, but from its ashes something new had grown, something perhaps even stronger. I think he would be, she agreed, and I think he'd be glad Ethan has you now. They stood in comfortable silence, watching clouds scud across the moon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the ranch to rebuild, fully debts to pay, a life to live. But tonight they were home, they were together, and they were free. A sound made them both turn, riders approaching. Clara's hand went to her rifle out of habit, but James stopped her. Look, he said. It wasn't a threat. It was their neighbors, dozens of them, riding in with wagons full of supplies. Henrik led the group, his broad face split in a grin. We figured you'd need help getting ready for winter, say, he called out. Hayseed, even some cattle from those of us who can spare them. Clara's eyes filled with tears. This was what they'd really won, not just the legal battle, but the right to be part of this community, to give and receive help without fear or shame. As the wagons were unloaded and plans were made for barn repairs and cattle drives, Clara noticed James talking quietly with some of the men. When she asked him about it later, he smiled. They want to form a cattlemen's association, pool resources, share water rights, stand together against any future threats. They want me to lead it. Will you? Only if you're my partner in it. This is your land, your fight that started all this. It should be both of us. Clara thought about it. A year ago, she'd been a desperate widow fighting just to survive another day. Now she was being asked to help lead, to protect others the way others had protected her. Yes, she said, together. As if in response to their hope, thunder rumbled in the distance. Real thunder this time, bringing the promise of rain. The drought was finally breaking. Clara and James stood with their arms around each other, watching the storm approach. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes, showing their land, their home, their future spread out before them. You know what Ethan asked me yesterday? James said. He asked if we could have a little brother or sister someday. Clara's breath caught. They hadn't talked about children, about expanding their family beyond the three of them. What did you tell him? I told him to ask his mama. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd ridden into her life when she needed him most. Tell him yes. Tell him we're going to fill this house with life and laughter and love. The rain began then, not the gentle drizzle of Austin, but a proper Texas storm washing the land clean. They stayed on the porch watching it fall, feeling it wash away the last of the fear and pain that had defined their lives for so long. Inside, Ethan had woken and come to join them, rubbing sleepy eyes. Is it finally raining, Mama? Yes, baby, the drought's over. He squeezed between them, and the three of them stood together, a family forged by loss but defined by love, watching the rain restore their land. In the distance, a neighbor's lamp flickered on, then another. Soon the whole valley was dotted with lights, each representing a family, a dream, a refusal to give in to darkness. What are you thinking about? James asked Clara. Tomorrow, she said. All the tomorrows we're going to have. They won't all be easy. No, Clara agreed. But they'll be ours. The storm intensified, but they didn't move. There was something cleansing about it, something that spoke of endings and beginnings all at once. The old Clara, the frightened widow, was being washed away. In her place stood Clara Ryland, rancher, mother-wife, and fighter. A flash of lightning illuminated a rider approaching through the storm. For a moment, old fear sparked, but then Clara recognized the figure, young Samuel Patterson, Mary's grandson. Mrs. Ryland, Mr. James! He called out, water streaming from his hat. Grandma sent me. Sarah Banks is having her baby, and she's asking for you, Mrs. Ryland. Sarah, one of the widows who'd stood with her, now remarried to a good man starting over. Clara grabbed her coat. "I'll come with you," James said. "No, stay with Ethan. This is women's work." She smiled. "I'll be back by dawn." As she rode off into the storm with Samuel, Clara thought about the cycle of life on the frontier. Death and birth loss and love endings and beginnings. Sarah's husband had been killed by Dalton's men 2 years ago. Now she was bringing new life into the world, proof that hope could survive even the darkest times. The cabin was full of women when Clara arrived, Mary Patterson directing everything with her usual efficiency. Sarah was struggling the birth difficult, but her eyes lit up when she saw Clara. "You came," she gasped between contractions. "Of course I came. We stand together, remember?" Through the long night, Clara held Sarah's hand, whispered encouragement, shared the strength that had carried her through her own trials. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy girl with lusty lungs, Sarah looked at Clara with tears streaming down her face. "I want to name her Hope Clara," she said, "for the hope you gave all of us." Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply squeezed Sarah's hand and nodded. Dawn was breaking when she rode home, the storm having passed, leaving the world washed and new. James and Ethan were waiting on the porch, breakfast already cooking. "How's Sarah?" James asked. "She's good. She has a daughter." "A daughter?" James repeated thoughtfully. "Maybe Ethan will get that sister sooner than he thinks." Clara felt her hand go to her stomach almost involuntarily. She hadn't been sure, hadn't wanted to hope too soon, but now, "Maybe he will," she said softly. James's eyes widened with understanding, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while Ethan demanded to know what was happening. "Your mama's giving us all a gift," James told him. "A new beginning for all of us." As the sun rose higher, burning off the storm clouds, Clara stood with her family on the porch of the home she'd fought so hard to save. The land stretched out before them, no longer dying but alive with possibility. She thought of Thomas, hoping he knew that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. She thought of all the widows who'd found strength in standing together. She thought of the community that had risen up against oppression and won. But mostly, she thought of the future, the children she would raise, the land she would nurture, the love she would share with this man who'd appeared when she needed him most. "What now?" James asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Now we live," Clara said simply. "We just live." And they did. The months that followed brought changes Clara could never have imagined during those desperate days when she'd stood alone against the world. Her belly grew round with new life, while the ranch flourished under James and Michael's careful management. The cattle they'd bought with the California gold multiplied, the rebuilt barn stood strong against winter winds, and the pastures fed by autumn rains had never looked better. But prosperity brought its own challenges. On a cold February morning, Clara woke to find James already dressed, checking his rifle with the practiced movements she'd come to recognize as preparation for trouble. "What is it?" she asked, one hand protectively over her growing belly. "Michael spotted riders last night. They made camp about 2 miles north but didn't approach. Could be nothing but you don't believe in coincidences." Clara pushed herself up, ignoring the protest from her back. At 7 months pregnant, everything had become more difficult, but she refused to be relegated to bed rest, as Doc Marcus kept suggesting. "I'm riding out with Henrik and some others to check. You stay here with Ethan." "James." He kissed her forehead gently. "I know you want to come, but think of the baby. Please." She wanted to argue, but knew he was right. The life growing inside her had changed everything, made her more cautious, even as it made her fiercer about protecting what was theirs. After James left, Clara busied herself with morning chores, but unease prickled at her neck. Ethan, now 7 and increasingly perceptive, noticed her distraction. "Is Papa James in danger?" he asked, using the title that had become natural over the months. "He's just being careful," Clara assured him, though her hand went to the pistol she'd taken to carrying even inside the house. The morning stretched long. Mary Patterson arrived around noon, claiming she needed help with preserving recipes, but Clara knew better. Word traveled fast in their community, and Mary's protective instincts had only grown stronger since the fight with Dalton. "Any word?" Mary asked quietly, while Ethan was feeding the chickens. "Nothing yet." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she kneaded bread dough. "It's probably nothing. Drifters maybe, or cowboys looking for work. When has anything in our lives been nothing? Mary replied with characteristic bluntness. The answer came with the sound of galloping horses. Clara grabbed her rifle despite her awkward gait, but relaxed when she recognized James's palomino. Her relief was short-lived when she saw his expression. "It's the Brazos Land Company," he said without preamble. "Elizabeth Brazos is dead. Her son killed her when he found out she'd helped us. Now he's here with professional guns wanting to collect that bounty personally." Clara's blood ran cold. "How many?" "8 that we saw. Maybe more circling wide." James dismounted, his movement sharp with tension. "Jonathan Brazos himself is leading them. He's not here for money. He wants revenge for his father's men and his mother's betrayal." "We fought off 40 of Dalton's men," Mary said stoutly. "We can handle 8. "These aren't local thugs," James countered. "These are professional killers from back east. They've done this before." Michael came running from the barn. Riders approaching from the south under a white flag. They assembled quickly, weapons ready but not raised. The approaching rider was Jonathan Brazos himself, young and sharp-featured with his mother's intelligent eyes, but none of her compassion. He stopped just outside rifle range. "James Ryland," he called out, "I've come to offer you a choice. State it and leave," James responded. "Face me alone, man to man. If you win, the bounty dies with me. If I win, your widow keeps the ranch and I take your body back for burial." His smile was cold. "Or refuse and my men burn everything you've built while you watch." "You'd murder a pregnant woman and child," Clara shouted, unable to contain her rage. "I'd prefer not to, Mrs. Ryland. That's why I'm offering this alternative. Your husband murdered my father's men. By rights, I could have you all hanged as accomplices." He focused on James again. "You have 1 hour to decide." After he rode off, the argument was fierce and immediate. "You can't possibly consider this," Clara said, gripping James's arm. "It's obviously a trap. If I don't, he'll make good on his threat. Men like him don't bluff." "Then we fight together like we always have," Michael insisted. James looked at the assembled group, his pregnant wife, his adopted son, their friends and neighbors. "And how many die? How many widows and orphans do we make today?" "So you'll make me a widow instead." Claire's voice broke. "You'll make Ethan fatherless again." James pulled her close, his hand gentle on her swollen belly. "I won't let them hurt you, any of you." "There has to be another way," Mary insisted. "There always is." But before they could debate further, unexpected help arrived. A group of riders appeared from the east, and Clara's heart lifted when she recognized the lead figure, Texas Ranger Captain Sam Houston Wallace, a man with a reputation for honest law enforcement. "Mrs. Ryland, Mr. Ryland." Wallace touched his hat. "Heard you might have some trouble with outlanders bringing violence to Texas soil." "Captain Wallace," James said carefully, "this is a private matter." "Nothing's private when armed men threaten Texas citizens." Wallace's weathered face was stern. "Jonathan Brazos and his men are wanted in 3 states for murder and extortion. If they're here, it's Ranger business." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "Can you arrest them?" "I can try, but they'll likely fight, and I've only got 4 men with me." Wallace studied James. "Though I hear tell you, folks have some experience with overwhelming odds." The plan came together quickly. Wallace would confront Brazos, officially demanding surrender. When they inevitably refused, the community would support the Rangers, making it a lawful action rather than vigilante justice. But Brazos was too smart for simple plans. When the hour was up, he returned with his men spread in a wide arc, impossible to surround or surprise. "Your answer, Ryland." Wallace rode forward. "Jonathan Brazos, you're under arrest for murder in the state of Missouri. Throw down your weapons." Brazos laughed. "Rangers have no authority over a private dispute. This is between Ryland and me." "You threaten Texas citizens. That makes it Ranger business." The tension stretched taut. Clara could see Brazos's men shifting hands moving to weapons. Violence hung in the air like smoke before a prairie fire. Then Ethan did something that stopped everyone cold. He walked out between the 2 groups, small and determined. "Ethan, no." Clara started forward, but James caught her arm. "Wait," he whispered. The boy stood in the killing ground between the armed men looking up at Jonathan Brazos. My first papa died because of a bad man. My papa James saved us. If you kill him, you're just another bad man. Is that what your mama would want?" Brazos's face contorted. "Don't you speak of my mother, boy." "She helped us," Ethan continued with the fearless honesty of childhood. "She said she didn't want more killing. She was nice. She was a traitor. She was your mama." Ethan's voice rose. "And mamas always want their children to be good. Mine does. Didn't yours?" Something in Brazos' expression cracked. For a moment, Clara saw not a vengeful killer, but a lost son poisoned by his father's legacy and broken by his mother's final rejection. "Get the boy out of there," one of Brazos' men muttered. "We didn't come here to shoot children." "Nobody's shooting anyone," Wallace said firmly. "This ends now peaceful-like, or you'll have every ranger in Texas hunting you down." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then unexpectedly, one of Brazos' men spoke up. "This ain't what I signed on for, boss. Threatening pregnant women and kids. I've done bad things, but I've got lines." "Shut up, Morrison," Brazos snarled. But Morrison had opened a crack that widened quickly. Two more of Brazos' men exchanged glances and slowly moved their hands away from their weapons. "Your mother was right," James called out, stepping forward to stand beside Ethan. "This has to stop. The killing, the revenge, the endless cycle. You can end it here." "By letting my father's killers go free. By being better than your father," Clara said, moving forward despite her ungainly state. "By choosing justice over revenge." "There is no justice," Brazos shouted. "My father's dead, my mother betrayed everything we built, and you stand there with your perfect little family on land that should be ours." "Your father burned children alive," James said quietly. "My sister's children, 4 years old and 6. They died screaming while your father's men laughed. That's the legacy you're defending." The words hung in the air like a curse. Several of Brazos' men shifted uncomfortably, and Clara saw the moment the fight went out of them. These were hard men, but even they had limits. "Boss," Morrison said quietly, "maybe we should go." Brazos looked around at his men, seeing their reluctance, then at the Rangers with their badges and authority, then at the community standing together united and unafraid. Finally, his gaze fell on Ethan, still standing bravely between the groups. "You killed them in self-defense?" he asked James. "I did. They just murdered my family. I stopped them from murdering more." Brazos was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he holstered his weapon. "The bounty's withdrawn. Officially. I'll file the papers when I get back to Austin." "And unofficially?" Wallace asked. "Unofficially, I never want to see or hear of any of you again." He turned his horse. "We're leaving men." But Morrison, the one who'd first objected, dismounted instead. "I'm staying if these folks will have me. I'm tired of this life. Tired of hunting and killing for rich men's grudges." It was a shock to everyone but James recovered first. "Can you work cattle?" "I can learn." "Then you're welcome to try." Brazos laughed bitterly. "You're all fools. This land, this life, it'll kill you all eventually. The drought, the Indians, the diseases. You're fighting for something that'll turn to dust." "Maybe," Clara said, "but it'll be our dust, our land, our choice." Brazos spurred his horse and rode away, his remaining men following. They watched until the dust of their departure settled, then collective relief washed over the group. "Well, Butts," Captain Wallace said, "that ended better than I expected, though I'll be keeping an eye on Mr. Morrison here for a while." Morrison nodded understanding. "Fair enough." As the Rangers departed and the crowd dispersed, Clara found herself shaking the delayed reaction to danger setting in. James supported her back to the house, Ethan chattering excitedly about his bravery. "You shouldn't have done that," Clara told her son. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Ethan said with 7-year-old logic. "And now Papa James is safe." That night, as Clara lay in bed with James's arms around her and their unborn child kicking strongly, she marveled at how much had changed. "Morrison wants to stay," she said. "Can we trust him?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," James replied. "We both got ours." The weeks that followed proved James right. Morrison, whose first name turned out to be Robert, threw himself into ranch work with surprising dedication. He was good with horses, better with rifles, and surprisingly gentle with Ethan, who followed him around asking endless questions about his adventures. March brought the spring roundup, and with it the birth of Clara's child. The labor was long and difficult, with Doc Marcus worried about complications. But Clara was nothing if not a fighter, and after 18 hours she delivered a healthy daughter with James's dark hair and her green eyes. "What should we name her?" James asked, cradling the tiny bundle with infinite tenderness. "Faith," Clara said without hesitation. "Faith Elizabeth Ryland. After Elizabeth Brazos. After a woman who chose right over family, truth over loyalty. Our daughter should know that strength." The community celebrated the birth with typical frontier enthusiasm. Gifts poured in quilts, clothes, even a hand-carved cradle from Henrik. Sarah Banks brought her own daughter, Little Hope, now toddling and getting into everything. "Our girls will grow up together," Sarah said, "free and strong without the fear we knew. But freedom required vigilance." 2 months after Faith's birth, trouble came from an unexpected source. The Apache, driven from their lands by expanding settlements, raided the outer ranches. 3 families lost everything, and fear spread like wildfire. A town meeting was called, voices raised in anger and fear. Some wanted to call in the army, others to form hunting parties. The rhetoric grew ugly quickly, old hatred surfacing. "We should kill them all," someone shouted. "Only good Indian is a dead Indian." "They were here first," James said quietly, but his voice carried. "We'd fight too if someone drove us from our homes." "You sympathizing with savages, now Ryland. I'm sympathizing with people defending their families. Sound familiar?" Clara stood Faith in her arms. "We've all fought for our homes. They're doing the same. Maybe instead of more killing, we try talking." "Talk to Apaches. They'll scalp you soon as look at you." "Or maybe they're as tired of death as we are," Mary Patterson interjected. "Has anyone actually tried talking?" The argument continued, but James and several others were already forming a plan. 3 days later, a small party rode out under a white flag, James and Morrison among them. Clara waited anxiously, Faith fussy in her arms, Ethan pressed against her side. They returned at sunset with unexpected companions, 3 Apache representatives, proud and wary, but willing to talk. The negotiations were tense, conducted through a Mexican translator, but gradually understanding emerged. The Apache needed access to traditional hunting grounds now claimed by ranches. The ranchers needed security for their families and livestock. A compromise was reached, specific corridors for passage designated, hunting areas, and most importantly, mutual warnings about other threats. "You trust them?" Henrik asked afterward. "I trust that they love their children as much as we love ours," James replied. "That's enough to start." The agreement held, though it was tested several times. Once, when rustlers tried to frame the Apache for stolen cattle, the Apache themselves helped track down the real thieves. Another time, when a young Apache warrior violated the agreement, his own people brought him to face justice. Through it all, the ranch prospered. The cattle multiplied, the land healed from its wounds, and the family grew closer. Ethan learned to read and write, surpassing Clara's teaching and hungry for more knowledge. Faith grew from infant to toddler, taking her first steps on her first birthday to James's delighted laughter. But the past had one more ghost to offer. On a hot July afternoon, a lone rider approached, weathered, thin, moving carefully, as if expecting to be shot. Clara didn't recognize him until he removed his hat, revealing gray-streaked hair and familiar eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, the blood draining from her face. But it wasn't Thomas. It was his brother, not Michael, who was in the barn, but David the eldest, who'd been presumed dead in the war 15 years ago. "Clara," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry to come like this. I only just learned about Thomas." The story came out in pieces. David had been captured, not killed, spent years in a Confederate prison camp, then wandered the country broken and lost. He'd only recently recovered enough of himself to seek out family. "I have no claim here," he said quickly. "I know Thomas is gone, you've remarried. I just needed to see that something of our family survived." Clara looked at this broken man, another casualty of violence and loss, and made a decision that would have seemed impossible years ago. "Family is always welcome here," she said. "James, this is David Hayes, Thomas's brother. David, this is my husband, James. Our daughter, Faith, and you remember Ethan." Ethan studied this uncle he'd never known existed. "You knew my first papa." "I did, boy. He was the best of us brothers, kind, smart, brave. Papa James is brave too, Ethan said firmly. He saved us. David looked at James, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, perhaps even gratitude. Then I'm glad, David said simply. David stayed helping with the ranch, sharing stories of Thomas's youth that made Clara laugh and cry in equal measure. James, secure in his place, encouraged these memories, understanding that the past didn't diminish the present. One evening, as they all sat on the porch, Clara and James, Ethan reading to Faith, Michael, and David sharing a bottle of whiskey, Mary and Sarah visiting with their children, Morrison teaching rope tricks to the young ones, Clara marveled at the family they'd become, not bound by blood alone, but by choice, struggle, and survival. You're thinking deep thoughts, James observed. I'm thinking about that first day you rode up horse limping, looking like death warmed over. Best day of my life, though. I didn't know it then. James, Clara said suddenly, that wasn't really coincidence, was it? Your horse throwing a shoe right here. He was quiet for a moment, then smiled. The shoe was loose. I might have helped it along when I heard about a widow standing alone against Dalton. Something about it called to me. So you chose us. And you chose me. Every day since you've chosen me. Faith toddled over, arms raised to be picked up. James lifted her, and she patted his face with chubby hands, babbling happily. Papa, she said clearly, her first word. Clara's eyes filled with tears, joy for this moment, sorrow that Thomas would never hear it, gratitude for the complex tapestry of their lives. Yes, sweetheart, she told Faith. That's your papa. As darkness fell, the children were put to bed. The visitors headed home, and quiet settled over the ranch. Clara and James stood together, looking at the stars that had witnessed so much death and birth loss and love endings and beginnings. No regrets? James asked. Clara thought of Thomas, of the life they'd planned that never came to be. She thought of the desperate widow she'd been fighting alone against impossible odds. She thought of the violence, the fear the nights she'd thought they wouldn't survive. Then she looked at what they'd built, not just the ranch, but the community, the family, the love that had grown from the ashes of tragedy. No regrets, she said firmly. Every step led us here. Even the hard ones, especially those. They taught us we're stronger than we knew. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, then another, a wild chorus that had once seemed threatening, but now felt like part of home. The land that had seemed so harsh, so unforgiving, had become theirs through blood, sweat, and tears. What do you think comes next? James asked. Clara smiled, thinking of Faith learning to walk, Ethan growing into a man, the ranch expanding, the community strengthening. There would be challenges there always were on the frontier. Droughts would come again, conflicts would arise, loss would visit as it visited everyone. But they would face it all together, this unlikely family, forged in desperation, but tempered by love. Life, she said simply. Whatever comes, we'll face it. Together, always together. They went inside, checking on the children one last time. Ethan had kicked off his blankets as usual. Faith slept with her thumb in her mouth, dark hair spread across her pillow. Perfect, precious, worth every fight they'd endured. In their own bed, Clara curled against James, feeling his heartbeat against her back, steady and strong. Outside, the night sounds of Texas, continued wind through grass, distant cattle, the ever-present cicadas. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. And I love you, he replied. Forever. Forever. Once the word would have seemed like a curse, an endless stretch of loneliness and struggle. Now it felt like a promise, a gift of infinite tomorrows with this man, these children, this life they'd built. Clara closed her eyes and for the first time in longer than she could remember, felt truly at peace. The widow who'd stood alone with a rifle ready to fight the world was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that the greatest strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together. The Texas stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanged, witness to all the human dramas played out beneath them. On the Hayes Ryland Ranch, a family slept peacefully, protected by love stronger than any weapon, bound by choices that had transformed strangers into soulmates, loss into hope, and a desperate last stand into a new beginning. The drought had broken. The storms had passed. And in the fertile ground of a hard-won peace, love bloomed like wildflowers after rain, unexpected, resilient, and beautiful beyond measure. Morning would come as it always did, bringing new challenges and new joys. But for now, in the quiet darkness, Clara Ryland held tight to her husband and listened to their children breathing, their ranch settling into sleep, their future stretching ahead like an open trail beneath endless sky. She had fought with everything she had. And she had won not just land or water rights or freedom from oppression. She had won the right to love and be loved, to build and dream, to raise her children without fear. "Thank you," she whispered, not to James, but to Thomas, to God, to the universe that had seemed so cruel, but had ultimately delivered her to this moment. A soft breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of coming rain. Tomorrow the work would continue. There were cattle to tend, children to raise, a community to strengthen. But tonight, wrapped in the arms of a man who'd trade 10 herds for one night with her, and had proved it by trading his freedom, his safety, his solitary life for the chaos and joy of family, Clara knew she was exactly where she belonged. The story that had begun with a widow's desperate stand against injustice had become something greater, a testament to the power of love over fear, community over isolation, hope over despair. And as sleep finally took her, Clara's last thought was of that long-ago moment when James had first spoken those words that had seemed so improper, so impossible. "I'd trade 10 herds for one night with you." Now lying beside him with their daughter down the hall, and Ethan safe in his bed, she understood the truth of it. Some things were worth more than land or cattle or gold. Some things were worth everything. Love was one of them. Family was another. And the courage to fight for both, that was worth 10 herds and more. The stars continued their eternal dance, the ranch slept on, and somewhere in the vast Texas night, the spirit of every widow who'd ever fought for her children's future smiled and whispered, "Well done."